Alrighty, folks, we are live. I am George, founder of Solo. I'm on with my friend John Skiba. John, thanks for coming on the show today.
Yeah, George, great to be here again.
Nice. Go Cougs.
Go
March
Coug.
Madness is getting started. There we go. Folks, today we have a very exciting show for you today. We are going to be talking especially about bankruptcy versus debt settlement, which is right for you. John is an attorney in Arizona. Before we dive into things, just giving our regular disclaimer, we aren't your attorneys. I'm not a lawyer. Solo is not a law firm. We're not providing you legal advice. We're just doing a webinar. And we're going to be talking about this core topic. We also have quite a few people who have written in with questions, even done a video question that we'll be playing a little bit later. And we reserve quite a bit of time on the show for any questions that you have while you're watching live. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put those into the chat now. And we'll be looking, just to make sure the audio visual is good to go. If you have any issues, if you aren't able to hear us, just let us know in the chat. Looks like people are saying they can hear us. So that is great. All right. First question here, John, what are the pros and cons of bankruptcy and debt settlement?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a question I deal with quite a bit here in my practice in Arizona. Because sometimes debt settlement's the best option, sometimes bankruptcy is the option. The benefits to debt settlement, probably number one benefit is just no bankruptcy. That you don't have to go through the court process. It's not on your credit. Chapter 7 stays on your credit report for 10 years. Your credit score recovers much more quickly than that, usually in about 2 to 3 years. But the biggest benefit to debt settlement is the fact that you're not going through a court process. Bankruptcy, particularly Chapter 7 bankruptcy, there's also risk of losing assets as you go through there. The idea behind the Chapter 7 bankruptcy is it gets rid of all of your credit cards, personal loans, medical bills, all that goes away completely. The trade-off is they're going to look and see if you have any non-exempt or non-protected assets that the court can sell and give that money to your creditors. Sometimes I have clients, where they have a lot of debt, but they also have a lot of assets. And so I always say those types of bankruptcies can be really painful because you're going to lose a lot of stuff. Debt settlement, you're not going to lose anything really. Other than just the settlement. So it's going to be more expensive generally than a bankruptcy because you're actually paying some of these creditors back. But the debt settlement, you're not going through this legal process. There's not a court looking over your shoulder to, see if there's assets that can be sold. And you retain some more control over the overall outcome. Now, the downside is you're going to have to pay quite a bit more. We talked before, settlements, I always tell people probably plan on about half. If you can get lower than that, great. But if you're getting a 50% discount on it, you still have to pay 50%. And depending on the amount of debt that you're carrying, that could be a pretty good chunk. Credit reporting also with debt settlement can be a little bit tricky just because until you get that paid, it's going to show up as an account that's in collections and could cause you some problems there. But, I've had bankruptcy clients where people come to me saying, hey, I'm looking for bankruptcy where debt settlement is a better approach, not only because of assets, but maybe because the debt is not at such a level that a bankruptcy is necessary. I've had it the other way as well. Some people are trying to do debt settlement and they have $150,000 of credit card debt and their income is $45,000 a year. And I'm like, it's probably not going to work because they're not even covering their basics, as far as living expenses. And so a bankruptcy makes more sense. So it's really, specific to your scenario, but there's definitely pros and cons to both approaches.
Great. We have a question from the audience. From SA, should I settle a debt if I'm being sued by the creditor?
Well, I can tell you most credit, most collection accounts, they do settle. They're suing you, and yes, and this is kind of surprising to a lot of people. Something I find personally in my law practice, and part of it is because I'm an attorney dealing with other attorneys, but it's a little easier actually to settle the case when you're in a lawsuit. Now, sometimes you get better deals before the lawsuit is filed, but what, pre-litigation, pre-lawsuit, you're calling into these customer service people, collection agencies. You're dealing with a different person every time, and it can be, if you've ever done that, it's super frustrating at times. Whereas if you've been sued, there's a law firm. Sometimes you even have an email of an attorney, and you can kind of get it done a little more quickly. I always say it's always, you should come up with the definition of what a win is for you. Winning can be settling it for 40%. You're still getting a 60% discount off of the total amount owed. Sometimes I think people get too caught up that, that the only way to win is if you owe nothing. Those types of outcomes are not, not frequent. Even when we're representing people, the amount of times where they just walk away and owe zero are pretty limited. So I think it's always a good idea to talk about settlement. Settlement discussions when a lawsuit's been filed are not admissible in court. There's a rule, it's called Rule 408 in the Rules of Evidence, that basically says, look, they want the parties to discuss a settlement. And so if you go in and say, hey, I can pay this, they can't turn around and tell the judge about it. So I think even if a lawsuit's been filed, it's not a bad option to try to get it settled.
Okay, great. So we have some questions that came in from the audience ahead of the show. Hannah, can you go ahead and play the video clip?
Hi there. This is awesome. I'm someone who left a 20-year marriage 6 years ago or so. Pretty much perfect credit. And in his evil, anger, bitterness, whatever, it's done a lot of financial destruction. And then, you got kids and you're starting to try to live and have homes for them, and then it catches up to you. So, I've done some settlements, which is worthless, but I've gotten to a point where you add some fraud, and once a bank, it seems, at least in Illinois, has sued you because they don't believe that it's identity fraud in spite of all the proof. It seems like all you can do really is file bankruptcy, and I'm curious if, like, with a vehicle that you're financing, and you're forced into a super high interest loan, which that's not their fault, you have no choice. How over under are you until you just say, here, take this damn thing? So thanks.
If you were able to hear that or not. I don't think John was able to.
Didn't hear it.
John, the clips from Jory, she is recently divorced, and she's wondering, basically she's getting sued for debt. She's gone through like some debt settlement firms that didn't really seem to work out for her. She's wondering if like her assets are tied up with her husband. What does she need to do to like deal with that whole situation?
Yeah. Divorce, I can tell you as a bankruptcy attorney that divorce is often kind of one of the things that seems to trigger a bankruptcy filing, just because it gets complicated. There's a lot of debts, who's taking what. And something that in most states that people, I feel like when they go through the divorce process, don't have a clear understanding of, is you're going to get when you go through the divorce, the final thing you get is a divorce decree, which ends the marriage. But it also has usually a property settlement and a debt settlement, where they say, this spouse is going to take these debts, this spouse is going to take these debts. That document is generally binding upon the two parties to it, the two spouses that are getting divorced. It's usually not binding on creditors. So a lot of people are surprised they're going through a divorce and say, hey, my husband said, he's going to take care of this. And then all of a sudden they get sued by a debt collector. So that's where it can get a little bit complicated. Usually you do still have to engage. I usually tell people, don't ignore the fact that even if you've gone through a divorce and the other spouse has said they're going to take care of that, if they're coming after you, you need to coordinate with your ex-spouse and try to get something done. Because in most states, they still can legally collect against you if you were on the account, if you were, one of the holders. So it is something that it adds an extra layer to everything, because you are dealing with an ex-spouse. Sometimes you're dealing with their ex-spouse's attorney, and it can make it complicated. But it falls along the same line of what we talk about a lot, and don't ignore it. Make sure there's a lot of communication with the debt collector as you're trying to come up with some type of settlement. Sometimes through the family courts, if you end up paying it and the other spouse said they were going to, you can seek some recovery from your ex-spouse that way. That's usually expensive and difficult as it is, but it's definitely one of those things not to ignore just because it's tied up in the divorce.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. And then what about so in the clip she bought a car after the divorce, it seems. And she's kind of wondering when she should just give up and like let the collector take the car if she's like behind on payments. Kind of seems like she's wondering if she's like upside down essentially on the car.
Yeah.
What should she do there, do you think?
Yeah, with car loans, secured loans where there's collateral, there's this property attached to it. In my experience, most car lenders, just your run-of-the-mill, loan, if you have it through a bank or whatever, they probably, once you hit 2, sometimes 3 payments, that's when you're really at risk of having the vehicle repossessed. If you bought the car, particularly kind of these buy here, pay here kind of places, they're a lot more aggressive. I've seen people be 5 days late on a payment, get the car repossessed.
What is that? What is a buy here, pay here?
Usually they're dealerships that they do the financing in-house. John Oliver did a great thing on this, showing some of these places where I feel like they're kind of a scam. They kind of prey on people that are in tight spots, have bad credit scores, things like that, where they were showing that this same vehicle was bought and sold, 15 times over a 6-month period, because they were so quick to repossess if something happened with the vehicle. And so those kind of places, if you can help it, you want to avoid them. They're almost kind of like payday loan kind of places where
you said it's called buy now, pay here.
Buy here, pay here. It's usually
Buy
where
here, pay here.
You go to a normal dealership, you apply for a loan, they farm it out to 10 different banks or credit unions, and then you get to choose the best one. These places, they do everything in-house. They're the dealership, the bank, everything, and they tend to, like I said, prey on people a bit.
Did John Oliver just do a piece on that recently or something? I just heard someone else talk about that. That was the first time I've heard that phrase.
No, it was probably a couple of years ago. It's really interesting to see this, because they tracked one vehicle as to see how many times it was bought and sold, and they sell the vehicle for X amount, require this big down payment, and then someone's 2 days late on their payment, they disable the vehicle, repossess it, turn around, sell it 3 days later to somebody else, and they just kept doing that over and over again.
So they're able to make more than the price of the vehicle when they do that, even, right?
Oh yeah, and the vehicles, I mean, these aren't new vehicles; they're used, and so it to me it should be illegal, but they do it, and so it's something to be really wary of as far as buying a vehicle at places like that. I know people get in tight spots and get desperate, and that's why they do it, but it's something you got to be careful.
How does somebody know if a dealership is one of these buy here, pay here? Is it just basically how sketchy it looks on the outside?
A lot of them literally will say that on the outside. You'll see signs saying buy here, pay here. I think it's kind of code of saying, look, even if your credit's not great, you can get a vehicle here, or they'll take any type of credit situation. The thing is, even with my bankruptcy clients, even coming out of a bankruptcy, most dealerships often have post-bankruptcy lending that's available. It's not perfect, but it's not horrible either, like those places. Mm-hmm. Those kind of things, again, they're kind of the payday loans of car dealerships, title loans. Those things are if you've been involved in that, that the terms are horrible, but people get in desperate spots, and that's why they go there. Right. So
nice. Yeah. Well, I got into the multi-year journey that is solo now, the 8-year journey that's solo, when I bought a car in my first year of law school, and it died on me 3 days after I bought it.
Oh, that's right.
It was like a mid-range dealership. It was a used car dealership, but they were selling like nice used cars, bought a car.
Yeah.
It was a good car. I mean, at least I thought it was a good car. And then it died 3 days after I bought it.
Yeah.
And they weren't going to refund me, but you know, I'd almost completed a semester of law school, and I figured they would refund me,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the path that we went down there, right? Basically, found out in that situation, found out that they had actually arguably made a mistake of selling me a warranty directly from the dealership,
Uh-huh.
which made it more than an implied warranty. Yeah, they basically meant that there's a fully implied warranty on the entire car because of the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act,
Ah,
and that led me to have quite a bit of leverage against them in that situation. So just kind of spelled it out for them that if things went to court, I was sure to win. And instead of doing that, they refunded my money. And then
yeah.
we
I'm
got
sure
the car.
they said note to self, don't sell cars to law students.
Right, right. Well, the real crucial thing there was that because the car had died so quickly,
Yeah.
the credit union that I was using to finance it hadn't sent them the check yet.
Yeah.
And the credit union really in the buyer's corner. So I just messaged the credit union and told them, "Hey, the car's dead.
Yeah.
You guys don't want to you guys don't want to buy a bad car that's
Yeah.
already broken."
Sure.
So
Yeah.
the credit union froze the check, and then after that, that was pretty much the end of the game there.
Yeah.
Hannah, we have an audio clip. We have an audio clip for you. Hannah, go ahead and do the audio clip from one of our listeners.
Hi there. I'm currently dealing with a debt lawsuit situation where I've been sued twice this year by Capital One and their attorneys. This is for the 2 credit cards I had from them that I fell behind on. I had a life circumstances change and was no longer able to afford the high monthly payments that were truly only contributing to interest and not actually lowering my balance. I was unable to settle with a large lump sum or make their suggested monthly payments to settle the debt. My total debt from this situation is now approximately $14,000. I consulted with an attorney. I didn't hire them, but they assured me that because I'm generally low income and was eligible for state benefits, I should be exempt from garnishment. So he told me to allow them to settle with me in court, or make a judgment on me, rather. I went through that process and submitted my finances, but just found out due to receiving attorney advertisement letters in the mail that an order for garnishment has been put in against me. This is not my only debt. I also have debt from Chase amounting to approximately $7,000, which is the same type of situation that I got into with Capital One. I'm frustrated in this situation and not sure what the best course of action is next.
John, you want to take a stab at that first? And maybe go
Yeah.
ahead and just provide a quick recap on our overall question situation.
Yeah. So, I mean, oh, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, she's got these accounts. She's being sued, a couple lawsuits. She was given the advice not to respond, allow a judgment. Essentially, they were telling her she's judgment proof, essentially meaning if you get a judgment, there's nothing they can do. As far as garnishment, they can't really take anything. And now there's some other debts. But they did file a garnishment. That's, I tell people it's very rare where I tell people to not do anything, to not respond to a lawsuit, because you may be judgment proof today. That doesn't mean you will be 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And these civil judgments, like in Arizona where I practice, they're good for 10 years. And they get renewed every 10 years. I was talking to someone just recently, I can't remember which state it was, the civil judgments, it was Massachusetts. They're good for 20 years. And so these things, and they're churning interest this whole time. It's also, she brings up a good point. Just because a creditor may not be successful at garnishing your wages or garnishing your bank accounts does not mean they won't try. They can still file the garnishment the writ of garnishment, and then you have to raise the objection to it. So it's important to know that because it's surprising, because she gets information from someone saying, hey, they can't garnish you, and then they are trying to garnish her. She may be able to object to that and make it stop. But she still, there's the stress, the worry, maybe attorney's fees, whatever there is necessary to do that. I talked about divorce being one of the things that often pushes people into the bankruptcy. Garnishment absolutely is number one. If they're going to be successful to garnishment, that's kind of the tipping point for a lot of people to go into a bankruptcy, because as soon as you file the bankruptcy, it stops the garnishment. Now, if they're going to try to settle it, you need to act quickly, because if they're successful in getting a wage garnishment in place, super, super difficult to get a garnishment, to get a settlement, because if you're going in offering a payment plan, they basically say, look, we have a payment plan. It's called this garnishment. That's what we're doing now. So it's important to act quickly, whatever, she's dealing with here, whether she's doing a bankruptcy to stop it altogether or to try to get some other type of voluntary payment plan in place before they actually do the garnishment.
Okay. Great. All sound advice. We have another question here from Juan in California. My wife was sued for $13,500 and has been served on January 29th, 2026 is what he says here, but I'm thinking he means 2025. It is, in fact, 2025 right now. So I think you probably were sued just a couple months ago. I was on this credit card from Bank of America, but I'm a senior and my retirement is protected by law, but we have a property and the equity is about $300K. Should I make an arrangement with the collectors for settlement, or would the better option be bankruptcy?
Situations like this, and this is where, we give the disclaimer at the beginning always that we can't give legal advice. So for sure, I don't know California exemption laws very well. They've got this kind of two-tiered system when it comes to protecting assets. And that's one of the things you look at in bankruptcy, particularly Chapter 7, is, are you at risk of losing anything? Now, I know that California has a homestead exemption that could protect the equity in your home up to a certain extent. That's something for sure to talk to an attorney about before you decide whether to jump into a bankruptcy. If your only debt was a $13,000 debt, I usually tell people that's you can settle something like that out. Because even if you get a 50% settlement on it, or even a 60 or 70%, you could probably structure it in such a way that you could do some minimal payments, no interest, and just get the thing dealt with. And but if it's something where, I always say, if you're able to deal with this Bank of America account and it's good to go, and then 2 months later, 3 more are gonna jump into its place, or there's lawsuits, then you may need to look at a bankruptcy option. But if you're considering bankruptcy, I always say you got to meet with an attorney in your state, because the exemption laws change from state to state, and that may be the determining factor whether bankruptcy is good or whether debt settlement. But again, the amount, if you're dealing with a $10,000 debt, 10 grand is 10 grand, but at the same point, usually those can be resolved in a way that helps you to avoid bankruptcy altogether.
Okay, great. Yeah, Juan, kind of looking into some broader trends here. So first, on the simple thing, bankruptcy or settlement. For solo, we are usually pointing people towards settlement as the best resolution for a debt lawsuit. That's because if you are being sued for debt that you recognize that you agree you owe at least a portion of it, if you don't respond, you'll lose by default judgment and your wages get garnished. You'll oftentimes pay. We've really crunched a lot of numbers. We have a Stanford engineer at Solo who went through, did all of the math, determined that a very conservative estimate is that somebody will pay 170% of the debt that they're sued for if they don't settle, if they end up losing their lawsuit. So you'll probably pay 70% on top of whatever you're being sued for. That's a very conservative estimate. And then besides that, right, even if you respond and then let's say the case gets dismissed, the collector can still file against you again, because it will usually be dismissed without prejudice. They can also come after the debt outside of court, even if the case gets dismissed, right? Because a dismissal isn't the same thing as a win. Dismissal just means the case is taken out of court, kind of on a technicality to some degree. You might say it's a win on a technicality, whereas it doesn't go before a judge. You don't get an order saying you don't owe the debt. It's just removed from court. And then bankruptcy, when people think bankruptcy, they're usually thinking Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which is the bankruptcy where something, where all the debts get discharged, right? And you're free, you're like off the hook. But unfortunately, since like 2008 and stuff, you're really usually only looking at a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, unless you're in very dire straits with like very limited income. Your situation, I mean, I'm guessing based on what you're saying here, Juan, sounds like you probably are at like at positive net worth. You have $300,000 of equity in your home. You're getting retirement payments. You probably have like a pretty good credit score, at least you did before the lawsuit, to be able to get a 13, a pretty high balance on this Bank of America card. And so you probably won't qualify for Chapter 7. Maybe you would, but I wouldn't think you would. And then Chapter 13 means you're going to get on to payment plan. And a lot of people default on those payment plans. And as John was saying, for Chapter 13, you probably have to pretty much give up your home equity, right? There's some ways around that. John, is that right? But pretty likely you'd have to give up the equity.
Well, in a 7, I would be more concerned about that. And again, you need to look at the California exemption laws. They're more complicated than most. And in Chapter 13, you can keep the house, but you're in a 3 to 5 year payment plan of making payments to this creditor. So it becomes a much more involved thing. And that's why if the choice is between the 13 and debt settlement, and you can do the debt settlement, and the creditors are working with you, I mean, that's going to be a cheaper, quicker way to go. Because, I always tell my clients in a Chapter 13, we're going to be friends for 5 years, as we kind of work through this. And so if there are other options that are going to be less expensive and quicker, it's worth looking at them.
Yeah, great. Yep. So definitely, yeah, bankruptcy, Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 both work well for certain situations. Right. If it makes sense, it makes sense. And then, and I think, I mean, honestly, Juan, I mean, if you have 300K in your equity, that's pretty good spot to be. I think my grandfather passed away last year, and I have a tremendous respect for the man because he died in a net positive position, cash wise. Right? That's not what life's all about by any means, but I think it's good to go out on a positive net worth position rather than a negative one, right? And I think that takes some foresight, takes some planning, but it's a good way to go. And I think as far as life goals, right, that's like one of my life goals. Definitely would rather go out in that position rather than having my family have to deal with like debts that I'm dealing with. So Juan, I think you can certainly get this thing wrapped up, and for a $13,000 debt, you could hopefully save quite a bit of money just by getting it settled. We have another question here from Gwen in New York. This takes a bit of a dark turn. Bankruptcy versus suicide? Question mark. Debt consolidation is not working. Sorry to hear about the situation, Gwen. We hear you. Debt can feel crushing, but we want you to know that bankruptcy is just a temporary, financial straits, financial despair is just a temporary situation. Suicide is a permanent thing. So definitely want you to get the help that you need there. There's always a way forward, even if it doesn't feel like there's one right now. You can please reach out for help. There are people who care about you, and there's resources that can help you through this. You're not alone. So we can talk about options and find a way forward here, there's always the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is 988, and that can help you out. More generally, yeah, I think I would choose bankruptcy every time. John, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable. I tell people all the time that, particularly like lawsuits and that, we always go to this really dark spot. I mean, some people go to, very extreme dark spots like this, like, hey, I'm just sick of dealing with this. But a lot of people call me and they're, just terrified they're going to go to jail over that. And I always say there's no jail. This is just civil type stuff. This is just money stuff. And putting a plan together can bring a lot of relief. That's when I do consultations, I always say, look, here's your 3 options. And then we go through them, and then, they may not be great options, but they're options. And I feel that alleviates a lot of the stress and the darkness that people deal with of saying, okay, look, on this end, I could settle the debt. Here, I could contest the lawsuit. Or option C, I could file a bankruptcy. You have options. All 3 can deal with it. Depending on your circumstances, one of those options may be better than the other. But there are solutions to this. Even if it's a bankruptcy, people recover from it. I mean, like I said, it's on your credit for 10 years, but the score recovers. And I last year, I had 2 bankruptcy clients buy houses 2 years after their Chapter 7. So it's something where you can recover from it. And a lot of people say, look, I should have done that a long time ago. There are options. You just need to kind of lay them out logically, which is hard to do, but just logically say, look, okay, I can settle it, I can fight it, or I can file bankruptcy. Those are kind of your 3 main options when it deals with debt, but you have them, and picking one will alleviate a lot of stress just because you have a plan forward and, a way to deal with it.
That sounds like a big win. You've had a couple of people buy houses just 2 years after filing Chapter 7.
Yeah, the credit score recovers fairly quickly. Most people, they file it drops about 150 points. But I mean, truthfully, once the discharge is entered, it zeroes out the debts on the credit report, and then it's just a matter of rebuilding. And I have clients routinely who get car loan applications and credit card applications during the bankruptcy, which is, there's kind of a bunch of factors that go into that. But the myth out there is if you file bankruptcy, financially your life is over kind of thing. It's not. And it's not a 10-year sentence of no credit. There's consequences to be sure, but it's not something that, like the last person there was saying, where we should go, that there's no hope kind of thing. It's always an option. I always tell people that's in your back pocket. If things get horrible and you're fighting it, it doesn't work out. If you can't get it settled, that's always an option there for you that kind of helps you to deal with it and move on.
I was listening to a news show recently that said the first person ever finally achieved a perfect credit score of 850. And the person who got that perfect credit score said what pushed them over the edge to the perfect score is actually having a late payment or passing the balance over for 1 month. I don't think it was a late payment, but he had a balance. He held a balance in one of his cards.
Yeah.
Sorry, not a late payment, but just made the minimum payment instead of the paying off the full balance.
Yeah.
Kind of a fascinating situation, right? Makes you kind of wonder a little bit about what the credit score is really trying to get you to do.
Yeah, the credit score, the whole credit, I could go on forever about credit reporting agencies. And, we feel like they're these almost like quasi-governmental agencies, but they're private companies. They're focused on the consumer, but on the back end, they're selling all your information to debt collectors. They have a really interesting thing they sell called a trigger report that they sell to debt collectors, where if you buy a house or buy a car or take out a loan, all of a sudden your creditors, people always say to me, gosh, it's such a horrible timing because we're trying to buy a house. It's not a coincidence. The credit reporting agency is selling your info to the debt collectors on the back end. So it's, you can't really, it's tough to live without a credit score, but it all feels like a big game a lot of times. So
The best way to sound like a government agency is to have bureau in your name.
that's right.
Right, for sure.
Sure, they're the bureau.
For sure. Yep.
Oh.
Okay. Well, folks. Just in wrapping up the show today, uh, summarizing for solo, you can use us to respond to a lawsuit if you've been sued. You can also use us to connect with the collector and get the debt settled. We are really focused on building trust with consumers as well as with collectors and building relationships with them so that we can help everybody achieve what they're looking for quickly, which is usually an ideal settlement, right? Really, we want to help everybody get towards an ideal settlement as fast as possible. And that's what we're working on. A couple exciting announcements for solo. One, if you didn't know yet, you can use our AI software to create many different types of legal documents now. So you can go onto our website, you can create response to interrogatories, response to requests for admissions. You can even create, start creating a will. You can create business documents, demand letters, whatever you want. And you also all have access to the world's best in leading AI models on Solo. So if you just log into your Solo account, on the dashboard page, you'll see the little Ask Solo button. You can just click that and start chatting in a unrestricted fashion with the leading AI model. So it's built on ChatGPT 4, and you can ask it, you can ask it questions, get tips on your situations, whatever that might be. More exciting stuff coming out soon on Solo. So thanks for showing up on the show, John. Thanks so much for coming on.
Great to be here.
Appreciate it. Always a pleasure chatting with you. And hopefully Thursday goes our way.
There we go. Go Cougs.
Go Cougs. All right. Take care. Bye.
All right.